Have you ever felt so lost that you thought you'd never be the same again? That the person you once were is gone, and what's left is just a broken reflection of who you used to be? This is how many soldiers describe the moment they return home after experiencing the chaos of war. The battle outside ends, but an even quieter war begins inside. The memories, the sounds, the smells, everything seems to bring back what you'd like to forget. And when the world expects you to smile again and go on with your life as normal, it's as if no one can see the invisible scars on your chest. Have you ever been there? Or do you know someone who is withdrawn from everything and everyone because they didn't know how to deal with the pain they felt? What you're about to discover may surprise you, because this story isn't just about survival. It's about the journey home, the reconnection with one's own essence and the power of faith to rebuild what seemed lost forever. Imagine someone who left their family behind to fight a war and returned bearing not only medals, but also the weight of memories that prevented them from embracing the ones they loved most. Each night became a battlefield. Every silence in the house seemed more deafening than the explosions at the front. This is the reality of those who carry emotional scars, the ones that don't show in photos, but that shape every gesture, every word, and every decision. When the pain becomes so great that it begins to push away the people who matter most, an even greater fear arises. The fear of losing not only control, but also one's family, one's place in the world. And perhaps that's why this story resonates so deeply, because on some level we all know what it's like to feel disconnected, what it's like to struggle to find ourselves again. Stay with me until the end, because this journey shows that even in the midst of darkness there's always a chance to return to the light. As this soldier grows further and further away from those he loves, the feeling that he is alone in this fight also grows. Conversations become rarer, hugs more distant, and the home ceases to be a place of rest and becomes a space filled with tension. But it is precisely at this point of pain, when it seems there is no way out, that something happens and changes everything. It is at this moment that a new story begins to be written, and what seemed like the end becomes the beginning of a journey of healing. And that's where the power of faith comes in, not as a magic solution, but as a bridge that connects the broken heart with the hope of starting over. This story will show you that no matter how deep someone has fallen, there's always a way back. But this return requires courage. It requires opening your heart. It requires facing painful memories. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. And as you follow this story, I want to extend an invitation. If at any point in this account you felt something deep inside, if these words brought to light a memory, a longing, or even a pain you know well, leave here in the comments what touched you most. It can be a simple phrase or a word that represents what you're feeling right now. When you share your experience, you not only show me that this message reached your heart, but you also help others going through similar situations realize they are not alone. This space is a safe place to exchange experiences, to transform pain into dialogue, and to build a community that supports each other. And if this topic resonates with you, take the opportunity to like this video. Each like helps this message spread further and reach those who need to hear something like this today. It's incredible to think that such a small gesture can be the push someone needs to keep going. And if you want to follow me on this journey, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this conversation. Here we'll continue talking about overcoming, faith, and new beginnings. And I really want you to be a part of this from the beginning. Because in the end, this channel isn't just about telling stories. It's about creating a place where they make a difference. Your participation is what keeps this message alive and helps bring hope to more people. So comment, like, subscribe, and stay with me, because what follows will show how this transformation truly began to happen. When this soldier returned home, the world seemed the same, but he was no longer. The quiet streets of suburban America, once synonymous with safety, now seemed eerily silent. The sound of a door slamming could trigger a memory of explosions, and the distant sound of fireworks on the 4th of July made his body stiffen, as if he were still on the battlefield. The war had ended outside, but inside him, the fight was just beginning. Each day was an invisible battle, a battle to remember who he was before, to try to connect with the family that waited for him, to feel once again that he belonged in the place he once called home. He sat at the dinner table, but conversation seemed distant. The children's laughter sounded muffled, as if coming from another world. It wasn't that he didn't love his family, quite the opposite. He loved them so much that he feared this new me would be incapable of protecting them, or giving them the man they deserved back. And this pressure was like carrying a backpack full of rocks. one no one else could see. In front of his neighbors and acquaintances, he pretended to be fine, but inside the house the truth was different. Sleepless nights, repetitive thoughts, and the feeling that he was slowly disintegrating. In the United States, thousands of veterans face this same scenario every year. They return from war carrying emotional scars that aren't always recognized, because it's easier to see the uniform and medal than the shattered heart. There's a silent expectation that after service they'll resume life as if nothing had happened, but it's not that simple. The psychological impact of war doesn't disappear just because the soldier returns home. This is the hidden truth that many don't understand. The greatest battle is not against a visible enemy, but against one's own thoughts, memories, and guilt. And it was at this point that the loneliness became even more cruel. He wanted to explain what he felt, but the words wouldn't come. How could he describe something he didn't even understand? The estrangement from his family began almost without him realizing it. A dinner where he remained silent. A night he preferred to sleep on the couch. A morning he left the house too early just to avoid conversation. Small gestures that accumulated, creating an invisible wall between him and those he loved most. And this wall seemed to grow larger with each passing day. What had once been home began to feel like enemy territory, full of memories, expectations, and looks he didn't know how to face. During that time, his mind was a minefield. Every memory could explode at any moment. Every decision felt risky. The mindset that had kept him alive in the war now kept him on constant alert. He couldn't relax. His body was back, but his mind was still at the front. The transformation he'd experienced outside had left deep scars, affecting even the simplest relationships. A hug could be difficult. An unexpected touch could trigger anxiety. Nights were the worst, because the silence brought back the sounds he wanted to forget. It was as if the past was always lurking, ready to pull him back. But amidst it all, something inside him still struggled. He wanted to start over. He wanted to reconnect with his wife and children. He wanted to laugh again without feeling guilty. The desire to live a normal life was as strong as the pain he felt, and this tension between what he wanted to be and what he was experiencing became unbearable. With each passing day, he felt he needed to find a way out, a way to break the cycle before it was too late. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this moment of crisis is precisely what can become a turning point in a life. It's at this point that decisions are made, mindsets shift, and the weight of everything that's happened begins to transform into a force for change. It's as if the soldier is at a crossroads. Either he remains trapped in the past, or he finds a path to healing. This is the journey many veterans face in silence, away from the spotlight, behind the scenes of everyday life. As you follow this story, think for a moment. How many people around you might be experiencing something similar, without you even realizing it? Maybe it's someone you see every day but who's never had the courage to tell you how they're feeling. Write in the comments, "I see these battles," just to show that you recognize the invisible struggle so many people face, and that this message resonated with you. He began to realize that the true marks of war lay not in the scars on his body, but in those no one could see. The nights were the cruelest. His body lay down, but his mind remained alert, as if danger could walk through the door at any moment. Insomnia became a constant companion. Every shadow in the room felt like an enemy. Every sound from the street triggered memories he didn't want to relive. The war was officially over, but the battlefield remained active within him, relentless. The silence of the early morning hours became a tribunal, where every decision he made on the front was judged, and he found himself trapped in the cycle of wondering if he could have done something differently, if he could have saved more lives or prevented losses. During the day, the weight didn't lift. The soldier tried to smile, tried to keep up appearances for his neighbors, his wife, his children, but he felt like he was just playing a role. The feeling of isolation grew, even surrounded by people. He was at the Sunday barbecue, but his mind was back to that day on patrol when he lost his closest friend. He was at his son's baseball game, but his heart was stuck in the sound of a military radio calling for backup. It was like living in two worlds at once, and it drained him in a way no one around him could understand. This is one of the hidden truths that is rarely spoken, the difficulty of reconnecting with a routine that seems small after you've experienced the extremes of war. And this impact went far beyond the emotional. His body felt it. His shoulders were constantly tense, his chest carrying an invisible weight. Any loud noise made his heart race, as if he were about to face an attack. At the supermarket, the bright lights and crowded aisles generated anxiety, and sometimes he would simply abandon the cart and return to the car, unable to explain why. This hypervigilance was exhausting and created an even greater distance between him and others. It was difficult for his family to understand why he would get upset over small things or prefer to isolate himself in his room. To them, it seemed cold, but in reality, it was fear. Fear of losing control, fear of hurting those he loved most with words or actions he couldn't control. Little by little, home began to become a place of tension. His wife missed her former husband, and the children, even without realizing it, sensed the change in the air. There were days when he couldn't join in meals, days when he would sit in the car for long minutes before entering the house, as if gathering strength to walk through the door. This kind of estrangement created a cycle that was difficult to break, because the further he distanced himself, the guiltier he felt, and the guiltier, the harder it was to get closer again. It's a silent struggle many veterans face, one rarely discussed in the news or in Memorial Day celebration speeches. The most challenging part is that on the outside everything seemed normal. He had a job, paid the bills, and was physically present. But inside, his mind was on red alert, as if he were living in a permanent state of war. And that's precisely where the danger lies. When pain becomes invisible, it also becomes easy to ignore, by others, and even by those who feel it. Society celebrates the soldier's return but doesn't always offer the necessary support to help them reintegrate. And so, many remain silent, trying to solve something alone that's too big to bear. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because these inner wounds don't have to be the end of the story. They can become the starting point for real transformation if there's room to talk about them and seek help. The healing journey begins when you recognize that these struggles are legitimate and deserve attention. It's a process that requires courage, because facing what hurts is much harder than hiding it. But it's also the only way to reconnect with your family, your own identity, and the life that seems to have been left behind. As you think about this, notice how many people around you may be silently fighting this battle. Perhaps you yourself have felt something similar, even without having experienced war. Comment: I recognize these wounds, just to show that you also understand that there are battles that no one sees, but that must be won for life to flourish again. As the months passed, what had been merely a feeling of discomfort turned into a chasm between him and his family. Conversations that had once been natural now became tense, filled with pauses and awkward silences. His wife would try to make conversation, talk about her day, tell a funny story about the kids, but he would respond with short sentences, unsure how to sustain the conversation. It wasn't a lack of love. It was as if each word weighed a ton, as if the simple act of speaking required energy he no longer had. At night, he would rather lie awake in the living room, staring into space, than lie next to the one he loved most. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid that nightmares would make him scream and scare his children. The atmosphere at home began to change. The children, even without understanding what was happening, felt the weight of the silence. They stopped running around the room so as not to disturb, stopped asking too many questions so as not to irritate their father. This is how the emotional impact of war seeps into the background of domestic life, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until it transformed the home into a field of tension. His wife found herself torn between compassion and frustration. She knew he was hurt, but she also missed the man who used to tell bedtime stories, who laughed loudly at Sunday breakfast, who had a sparkle in his eyes when planning a family trip. This emotional absence hurt as much as if he weren't there physically. In many American homes, this is a silent reality. It's not just veterans who carry invisible scars. Their families are also marked by this battle. Small arguments over simple things like household bills or daily chores escalated into fights that ended in slamming doors and hidden tears in the bathroom. Each tried to cope in their own way. She by immersing herself in daily responsibilities, he by isolating himself even further. It's as if there are two islands separated by a sea of the unsaid, and the more time passed, the harder it became to build the bridge that could connect them again. This distance wasn't just emotional but physical. He'd put in extra hours at work, volunteer for extra shifts, anything to avoid coming home early. And when he arrived, he'd often head straight to the garage or yard, looking for manual tasks to keep him occupied. Hammering, chopping wood, fixing something. Any noise was better than the silence that awaited him inside. His family, in turn, grew accustomed to his absence, developing a parallel routine. Meals went by without him. School events were attended only by his mother. Little by little, he became a visitor to his own life. Behind this behavior lay a whirlwind of feelings that he himself couldn't decipher. There was guilt for not being the present father he wanted to be. There was anger for feeling like no one understood what was going on in his mind. There was shame for not being able to get over it, like everyone told him he should. This mix was so intense that he would often explode over small things. A misplaced towel, a toy on the floor, and later bitterly regret it. The weight of these outbursts made him even more reclusive, because he was afraid of emotionally hurting the people he loved. It's a difficult cycle to break, and it only deepens the feeling of isolation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this kind of estrangement isn't just a consequence of war. It's a reflection of how we deal with pain. It's as if the soldier is trying to protect himself from feeling even more, building walls to keep himself from being hurt again. But these walls ultimately prevent love and support from reaching him. And this is where the journey of transformation needs to begin, recognizing that reaching out is more emotionally risky, but it's also the only chance to rebuild the bonds that have been broken. If this part of the story made you think of someone or a situation you've experienced, write in the comments, "I feel this weight," just to show that you also understand how difficult it is when the distance at home becomes greater than any border outside. There was a day when everything seemed to fall apart. It wasn't a major tragedy, it wasn't a dramatic event. Sometimes the breaking point comes in the form of something simple, almost banal, but it unleashes everything that had been building up. That morning, he had promised his wife he would go to their son's school event. It was something small, a music performance, but it meant a lot to him. He got ready, drove to the school, parked in the courtyard, and couldn't get out of the car. The voices, the crowd of parents, the sound of children running around in the courtyard, it all seemed too much. He stood there, hands on the steering wheel, feeling his chest tighten and sweat run down his forehead. After a few minutes, he started the car and drove away without watching the performance. When he arrived home, he found his wife silent, holding a cup of coffee in the kitchen. She didn't shout, didn't complain, but the look in her eyes said it all. His son didn't ask anything either, just went into the bedroom and closed the door. It was at that moment that he felt as if he were broken inside. It wasn't just the war that haunted him anymore. It was the fact that he was losing his own family, that he was becoming a stranger in his own home. This realization hurt more than any physical injury he had ever suffered. It was as if all the memories of the battlefield, all the sounds and smells, all the fears and guilt, came flooding back at once, in a knot impossible to untie. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He sat in the dark room, listening to the clock tick and wondering how he'd gotten there. For the first time, he felt afraid of himself, afraid that he wouldn't be able to leave this mental place, afraid that he'd keep moving away until there was no turning back. Memories came flashing through his mind. The friend who never returned, the local boy carrying water for the soldiers, the sound of the radio calling for reinforcements that never arrived. Each memory carried a burden of guilt, as if he were responsible for everything. This was the hidden truth he avoided facing. The war wasn't over for him, because deep inside, he still felt a duty to save everyone, and he blamed himself for not being able to. The following days were even more difficult. He began missing work, not answering calls and barely leaving his room. His wife tried to pull him back, but he withdrew more and more. It was as if he'd locked himself inside, waiting for the world to pass without him. Small things triggered disproportionate reactions. The sound of a lid falling to the floor made his body flinch. A sudden touch on his shoulder made his heart race. It was impossible to live like this, and he knew it. It was during this period that dark thoughts began to surface, the kind you push away immediately but then insist on returning. The breaking point wasn't a moment of explosion, but a moment of profound silence. One afternoon, sitting in the backyard, he looked up at the gray sky and felt an emptiness so great it seemed there was nothing left in him. The tears came without warning, silent, heavy. They weren't tears of anger, but of exhaustion. It was as if his body was saying, "I can't hold it in anymore." In that instant, he realized that if he continued like this, he would not only lose his family, but himself as well. And that was the moment something changed. It wasn't a visible change to the outside, but inside a decision began to form. Something had to be different, or all would be lost. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it's at these moments that life can take a completely new direction. When pain reaches this point, it has the power to paralyze, but it can also become the spark for transformation. It's as if the mind is telling us it can't continue with the same mindset anymore, that it's time to break the cycle, to make decisions that truly bring healing. This is the point at which many veterans seek help for the first time, or find a path of faith, or decide to open up to someone they trust. This is when the most painful revelations surface, but with them also arises the possibility of rebuilding. Have you ever experienced a moment like this, when it seemed like you no longer had the strength to carry on? Write in the comments, "I've felt that limit," to show that you understand the weight of this turning point and that this part of the story resonated with you. It was just when the weight seemed unbearable that something unexpected happened. It was a cloudy Sunday, and he decided to leave home aimlessly just to try to clear his head. He got in his car and drove through the quiet streets of his town, the same streets he'd often walked before the war, but which now seemed strange. He stopped in front of a small church he'd often seen in passing but had never entered. He wasn't sure why, but that morning something compelled him to get out of the car. There had been nothing planned, no intention of attending a service, no desire to talk to anyone. He simply walked in and sat in the last pew, as if seeking a safe place to breathe. Inside, the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy silence of his living room at night, nor the uncomfortable silence of the kitchen after an argument. It was a silence that seemed to embrace, that brought a strange sense of peace, and it was in that moment, sitting alone, that something began to stir inside. The pastor began to speak about starting over, about how some wounds are not meant to be hidden but to be healed. Each word seemed to pierce the armor he'd built over the years. He hadn't cried in a long time, but that day the tears came effortlessly, as if they were just waiting for an opening to fall. It wasn't an instant miracle. He didn't leave completely transformed, but he did leave different. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. It was small, almost timid, but it was there, and that small flame was enough to make him make a decision. Maybe he couldn't change everything at once, but he could take a step, and that step was to seek help. He called a friend from the army who he knew had been through something similar and asked to talk. It was difficult to admit he was struggling, but hearing his friend's voice on the other end of the line, he felt he wasn't alone. This was one of the first important revelations of this process, the realization that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of courage. In the following days, he began attending a support group for veterans. At first, he just listened, unable to share much, but each story he heard seemed to dismantle a piece of the wall that separated him from the world. He realized that other people also faced nightmares, panic attacks, and fits of rage. This identification was powerful because it shattered the lie he'd been feeding himself that he was broken, in a way no one could understand. Discovering he wasn't alone brought relief and opened space for new decisions. It was in this environment that faith began to grow within him, not as a distant religious concept, but as a thread of hope, pulling him out of the abyss. Small gestures began to make a difference. A coffee with company, a leisurely conversation with his wife, a night where he managed to sleep without disturbances. Each of these victories seemed small, but they had a profound impact on his mindset. He began to believe that perhaps he could rebuild what was lost, that there was still time to restore relationships and find a purpose greater than the pain he carried. Now I want to delve even deeper into this, because this turning point isn't just about relief, it's about transformation. It's the moment when a person chooses to face the shadows instead of running from them, and that changes everything. It's as if life gives a second chance and says, you can still write a new chapter. This process is challenging, but it's in it that true strength reveals itself. He was just beginning to discover that faith wasn't just a refuge, but an active force pushing him forward, requiring daily decisions to avoid returning to the same place as before. If this brought back any memories or made you think of a time when you felt that little spark of hope, comment below. I saw that light, to show that you also believe that there is always a way out, even on the darkest days. At first, the healing journey was almost invisible to outsiders. He didn't wake up to a new day with everything resolved. He woke up in the same room in the same suburban house with his mind still buzzing. The difference lay in one intimate decision, calling the VA clinic and scheduling his first therapy session. That alone was a huge step. The appointment fell on a Tuesday morning, and the mere thought of sitting in front of someone and telling them what he'd never told anyone seemed more daunting than any night patrol. But he went. He arrived a few minutes early, waited, watching the flags hanging in the lobby, and took a deep breath when he heard his name. The therapist didn't rush him, didn't try to fix anything in 5 minutes. She asked how his nights were and what he felt when the lights in the house went out. For the first time, He spoke aloud the hidden truth about the fears that followed him even to the supermarket. It was uncomfortable, but at the same time liberating, like opening a window in a room that had been closed too long. At the same time, he revived something that had always been there, but had faded. The simple prayer, said at the kitchen table, while the coffee brewed and the morning light streamed through the blinds. It wasn't a pretty speech, it was a whisper. Help me get through this day. This silent conversation, repeated between sips, began to change his mindset. Faith didn't come like a lightning bolt knocking down walls. It came like a steady thread pulling step by step. He began to jot down small revelations in a notebook. I slept for 3 hours straight. I endured the crowds at the grocery store today. I went to my son's game and stayed until the end. These notes were humble, but they had an impact because they showed progress when his mind told him nothing was changing. The family also joined this journey, little by little. His wife proposed a new routine: TV-free dinners, cell phones on silent, and a 10-minute check-in where everyone would share how they were, without judgment. At first, he could barely find the words. He'd say, tired, tense, and leave it at that. Over time, those 10 minutes took shape. He told her about the nightmare from the night before, about the hospital corridor that sometimes appeared out of nowhere in his mind, about the sound of doors that put him on alert. The children, with the honesty only children possess, began asking direct questions and offering simple solutions. Dad, do you want me to warn you before I touch you? This kind of care seemed small, but it reduced triggers and brought closeness. In therapy, practical tools emerged. He learned to identify the wave before the tsunami, feel his body stiffening, notice his shallow breaths, sense when memory began to pull him down. The technique was simple: breathing while counting, naming what he was feeling, anchoring his focus on something present, but the effect was enormous. This set of micro-decisions reconfigured connections within. He began walking around the block after dinner, even when the cold autumn wind bit his hands. Upon returning, he would write down, I walked 10 laps. And one of those nights he crossed paths with a neighbor who served in another unit. They exchanged a wave, then a few words, until they agreed to walk together on Thursdays. A commitment was created, something that pushes when the willpower fails. There were also new limits. Things he'd endured to avoid conversation now gained boundaries. He agreed with his family that fireworks would be watched from inside the car, windows up, music playing softly. A simple adjustment for the 4th of July that made all the difference. He asked that doors not be slammed and that, whenever possible, he be called before entering the room. At work, he talked to his supervisor and adjusted his shift to avoid rush hour. These choices gradually stabilized the ground. On the spiritual side, he set aside 15 minutes in the late afternoon for a ritual he came to call anchoring time. A short prayer, a reading of a psalm, 3 deep breaths, and a question in his notebook. What's still weighing me down today? Sometimes the burden was concrete, sometimes it was a nameless fear. Writing helped give shape to what seemed like an amorphous monster. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because real transformation rarely happens in the spotlight. It happens behind the scenes, where no one sees. It was there that he realized that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about putting it back where it belongs. An important revelation emerged during an EMDR session. The memory that had haunted him for years lost its clarity when he managed to associate it with a new belief. I did the best I could with what I had. This phrase, repeated almost like a prayer, disarmed old guilt. Another decision was to return to doing something manual, not as an escape, but as therapy. He and his son built a baseball box in the garage. Wood, sandpaper, screws. The previously feared noise took on new meaning. The sound of construction, not destruction. The emotional impact of this was quiet and profound. In the family, there was a Saturday that became a milestone. He invited his wife out for coffee, taking his time. He didn't promise more than he could handle. He didn't rehearse speeches. He simply said he wanted to relearn how to be present. She cried, and so did he. And together they decided on a simple plan: a date every 2 weeks, a movie night at home every Friday, and a monthly visit to the school district counselor to understand how to support the children. Nothing epic, everything consistent. The routine began to chart a new course, and the home, previously full of tension, began to show signs of ordinary life. Pots on the stove, laughter in the hallway, kicking a ball in the yard. Small victories that, added together, changed the atmosphere of a home. With the veterans group, he discovered the power of mentorship. A former sergeant, who had already traveled a few miles down that road, said, "Healing is a kilometer, not a sprint." That stuck. He exchanged messages on difficult days, celebrated by text when he slept 5 hours straight, asked for advice when anger took over. He also began serving, bringing coffee to a meeting, picking up a colleague who didn't have a car, organizing a winter coat drive. Serving didn't erase his pain, but it gave him purpose. The hidden truth that emerged there was simple and powerful. The pain that broke you can be the same pain that connects you to those who need you. There were setbacks, of course. A siren in the early morning brought back memories of the base. A traffic jam triggered the old panic of being trapped. But unlike before, he didn't view these episodes as failures. He used the tools, talked to his therapist, prayed, and warned his wife, "I'm more sensitive today." This honesty avoided misunderstandings and prevented the cycle of guilt from reoccurring. His mindset shifted from, "I am my trauma," to "I am treating my trauma." It seems like a small detail, but it changes everything. He began to realize how the words we choose shape the path, so he replaced, "I'll never get better" with, "I'm in process." Replacing the final sentence with a verb in motion gave him back the ownership of his own journey. In the neighborhood, people went on with their lives. Little league games, fall fairs, PTA meetings. Nothing stopped because of him, and paradoxically, that helped him. Life didn't ask permission to move on, and he decided to walk with it. One Sunday, he quietly sang the church hymn with trembling hands. Another, he managed to sit through the entire service without looking at the door. At home, he accepted his daughter's invitation to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle on the living room table. 3 nights later, when they put the final piece together, he smiled with a pride he hadn't felt in a long time. It was just colored cardboard, but it was also a clear symbol. Piece by piece, something inside him was finding its place. And when he finally returned to the school gymnasium for another performance, he took a deep breath in the parking lot and remembered all the Tuesdays, all the pages in his notebook, all the small decisions that had brought him there. He walked in, not like a movie hero, but like a man who knows the price of every step. His son saw him from the audience and waved with that smile of someone who's been waiting a long time for this moment. He felt a lump in his throat, but this time the lump didn't paralyze him. It anchored him, because healing, in the end, is this: having tools when fear returns, having people around when the mind tries to isolate itself, having enough faith to get through another day. If, in any way, this part of the story touched a nerve with you, or reminded you of someone in the United States who is walking this path with care and courage, write in the comments, "I'm following step by step." It's short, it's sincere, and it helps keep the conversation alive as it will continue through important areas of this journey. It was on a seemingly ordinary afternoon, with no special date marked on the calendar, that he felt he could postpone it no longer. The smell of dinner wafted through the house, a familiar aroma that always reminded him of the few moments of normalcy they'd had in recent years. The children were in the living room watching cartoons, and his wife was setting the table when he approached, nervous. His heart was beating fast, his hands were sweating, but he knew he had to speak before his courage waned. He asked her to sit down, and for a few seconds he remained silent, staring at his hands until the words began to come, slow, heavy, as if each one needed to penetrate a concrete wall. He apologized. Not a formal apology, the kind you say out of obligation, but a genuine apology, accompanied by tears he didn't try to hide. He said he knew how far he'd drifted, acknowledged every night he'd locked himself in his room, every conversation he'd let die halfway through, every moment when silence spoke louder than it should have. He didn't try to justify himself, didn't use the war as a shield. He simply admitted he'd hurt the people he loved most and that he was tired of carrying that burden alone. The tears began to fall, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't fight them. His wife was silent for what seemed like endless moments. He was afraid of her reaction, afraid of hearing that it was too late, but instead of harsh words, she simply stood up and hugged him, a long hug that mixed relief, pain, and longing. It was as if something inside had broken, but this time in a good way, like a dam opening to finally let the water flow. He cried on her shoulder, and she cried with him, and in that embrace, the kitchen became the safest place in the world. It was as if they were both saying without speaking, "We're still here. We can still try." The children realized something was wrong and went to the kitchen. The eldest son stood in the doorway, watching intently until his father knelt down to his eye level. With a choked voice, he said he was trying to improve, that sometimes he got sad and angry for no reason, but that it wasn't their fault. He apologized for not being more present, promising to work hard to change. The boy approached and hugged his father without saying anything, a simple gesture that disarmed any remaining resistance. The youngest daughter, who had been watching from afar, ran and joined the hug. That moment, which could have lasted only a few seconds on the clock, felt eternal in his heart. It was as if a part of his soul that had been dormant had finally awakened. That night, after the children went to bed, he and his wife stayed in the living room talking until late. It was an unvarnished conversation, full of pauses, tears, and confessions. She told him how lonely she felt, how many times she feared he would leave for good, not physically, but emotionally. She told him about the nights she cried silently in the bathroom, about the daily struggle to keep the children away from tension. He listened to everything without interrupting, something that would have been impossible for him before. When he spoke, it was only to acknowledge the strength she had in keeping the family afloat when he was away, and to thank her for not giving up. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house began to change almost imperceptibly. At first, he simply sat at the dinner table even if he didn't have much to say. Then he began offering to pick up the children from school and help them with their homework. These small decisions created a routine that gradually brought life back to the home. The laughter, which had been absent, gradually returned, at first shy, then more freely, until one day everyone was laughing together at some silly thing, and he realized he was actually laughing, not just trying to look good. One Saturday, they decided to go to the park together. He pushed his daughter on the swing, and the scene, so simple, had a huge impact. The wind blowing on his face, the sound of children's laughter, the open sky. It all felt like a gift after so many cloudy days inside. His wife watched from afar, with a smile full of hope. In that moment, he realized he wasn't just surviving the day, he was living again. This difference was what ignited in him the certainty that it was worth keeping trying. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because reconnection doesn't happen all at once. It's built day by day. It's the choice to stay present even when instinct tells you to pull away. It's having the courage to say, "I'm feeling bad today," instead of withdrawing into silence. It's asking for forgiveness quickly and making room for others to speak up. This transformation isn't just for him, but for the entire family, who learn to deal with the ups and downs more gracefully. Over time, the home ceases to be a place of tension and becomes a place where everyone feels safe. And this safety is the fertile ground where love can blossom again. If this excerpt reminded you of a moment like this or someone who experienced something similar, comment below, "I felt this new beginning," just to show that you understand the power that exists when a family decides to rebuild bonds, even after so much pain. Today, his life feels completely different from those dark nights when the silence was deafening. Not because everything is perfect or because the scars have disappeared, but because he's learned to live with them. The scars are still there, and some memories still surface from time to time, but now they no longer dominate him. He recognizes them as part of his own story, as chapters that cannot be erased but that no longer have the power to write their own ending. This shift in mindset is what gives him the strength to get up every day and continue building a routine that makes sense, a routine where there's room for work, family, rest, and even the unexpected. Mornings have become a meeting point with himself. He wakes before sunrise, makes a strong coffee, and writes in his notebook. Sometimes a thank you, sometimes a concern, sometimes just a word that represents how he feels. This simple practice has become a ritual that organizes his thoughts and helps him start the day mindfully. Afterwards, he takes a short walk around the block, greets neighbors, feels the cool air on his face. Things that once seemed insignificant now carry weight, because they represent the victory of another day lived to the fullest. At work, he's come to be seen as someone who inspires confidence. Before, he would retreat to his own corner, avoid conversation, and keep his head down. Now he participates in meetings, offers ideas, and even shares bits of his experience when he senses someone needs courage to face a challenge. He doesn't romanticize what he experienced, but he doesn't hide it either. He's discovered that his story has an impact, that it can be a tool to open conversations about mental health and what it truly means to care for veterans after they return home. He's been invited to speak at local schools during Veterans Month and uses these opportunities to show young people that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. At home, The atmosphere is different. He's not a perfect father, but he's a present one. He joins in meals, laughs at his children's silly jokes, helps with homework, and even started taking her daughter to softball practice on Saturdays. These moments have become little treasures he cherishes, knowing how hard she fought to be there. Weekends have taken on a new energy. Backyard barbecues, evening card games, bedtime stories. It's as if the house has been aired out, and every room is breathing again. Their relationship with their wife has also transformed. They continue to have difficult conversations when necessary, but now these conversations are constructive. They've learned to recognize triggers, to call a timeout when tensions rise, and to return to the conversation when emotions have calmed down. This honesty has created an environment where they both feel safer talking about their feelings without fear of judgment. It was a long process, full of ups and downs, but it was worth every effort because it resulted in something stronger than they had before. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this phase isn't just about personal reconstruction, but about using what's been learned to reach others. He's become a mentor to new veterans who arrive at support groups filled with fear and distrust. When someone enters their first meeting silently, he's the first to extend his hand and say, "I know how you feel." This simple gesture is often what opens the door for others to begin their journey of transformation. It's as if each healed wound in him is now a beacon, living proof that there is a way out of the maze of trauma. Dates that were once painful, like Veterans Day or Memorial Day, are now opportunities for reflection and gratitude. He brings his family to participate in the tributes, lights candles, and remembers friends who never returned, but without drowning in guilt. He can speak about them with respect and longing, but also with the certainty that honoring these memories means continuing to live, and living well, with purpose, is the best way to honor those who have passed. This new life isn't a straight line. There are days of relapse, nights where sleep is still interrupted by memories that insist on returning. But the difference lies in how he deals with these moments now. He doesn't withdraw. He doesn't shut himself off. He talks to his wife, writes in his notebook, calls a trusted friend. This support network is the anchor that keeps him from being dragged back down. And each time he weathers one of these storms, he becomes stronger and more aware that it's possible to carry on. Today, he looks in the mirror and sees someone who has been through the fire but hasn't lost himself in it. The scars are still there, and he carries them with dignity, like silent medals of survival. They don't define who he is, but they remind him of where he came from and all it took to get here. This realization gives meaning to what he's experienced and transforms pain into fuel to help others find their own path. If this part of the story brought you hope or reminded you of someone who managed to transform wounds into strength, comment below. I see value in scars, to show that you also believe that each mark can be the beginning of something new. This is living proof that war may have left deep scars, but also that faith and the courage to face one's inner self can rebuild all that seemed lost. The journey that began with sleepless nights and heavy silence has now transformed into meaningful days, in a home that once again has laughter and sincere conversations. It wasn't magic. It wasn't instantaneous. It was a process of daily decisions, of falling and rising again, of admitting fragility, and learning to ask for help. This hidden truth about what it truly means to overcome something so profound needs to be spoken. Overcoming isn't forgetting. It's integrating what happened. It's allowing the scars to tell a story of resilience, not just pain. When he looks back, he sees not only the dark days but also the small signs that brought him here. The first phone call asking for help, the first tension-free family dinner, the first hug without fear of breaking. Every step had an impact. Every revelation served to shape the mindset he carries today. And this reminds us that transformation is not a destination. It is an ongoing journey, made of courageous choices. For many parents in the United States facing similar internal battles, this is a powerful message. No matter how long the road of suffering has been, there is always the possibility of starting over, of restoring relationships, and rebuilding one's life. Faith was the thread that sustained each of these steps, not just as an abstract belief, but as a driving force behind practical decisions. It was faith that reminded him that it was worth trying again after a setback, that encouraged him to open his heart to his family, and that moved him to use his story to inspire others. Today, he doesn't hide his scars. He displays them as a testament that it is possible to cross the darkest valley and emerge on the other side not only alive, but stronger. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this reflection isn't just about him. It's about each of us who have gone through periods of darkness and needed to find light to carry on. It's about the strength that emerges when we decide to face the shadows of our own pain and transform them into learning experiences. It's about creating a new narrative for our lives, one that isn't dictated by trauma, but by the conscious choice to live fully. When we understand this, we realize that hope isn't something distant. It's built day by day, in honest conversations, in small gestures, in decisions that seem insignificant, but which, when combined, change the course of an entire story. If this story spoke to you in any way, if at any point you saw yourself in this soldier or in the family who fought to keep him close, write in the comments, "I choose to start over." This simple phrase is a powerful reminder that new beginnings are possible, that no matter what you've been through, there is a path back to the life you dream of. If you've made it this far, it tells me a lot about you and how this story touched your heart. We've been through an intense journey together, full of revelations, and if this video resonated with you, please leave a like, not only to help this content reach further, but to show that this kind of conversation matters. Write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end," just so I know you stuck with me until the very end and that this message spoke to you in some way. And if you want to continue walking with me on this journey of inspiring and empowering stories, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next meetings. There's a video here that complements this topic and deepens this reflection even further. Click and stay with me there, because there's still much to experience and learn together.